Good morning. This is Dennis Reed talking to you from my summer house studio. It's a lovely bright morning this morning. I hope it is when this is broadcast to you, a thought for the day from St Margaret's. I pre-recorded this a week or so before this particular broadcast. This morning I want to talk to you about some of the outcomes and what we do in the future after this pandemic. It may strike you as inconsequential, other things that have happened besides the serious illnesses and deaths which have taken place during this pandemic. A peculiar thought struck me in this last few weeks, which I want to share with you. In the past, we've been continuously reminded of the expected climate change brought about by our excessive generation of carbon dioxide due to the combustion of fossil fuels. One of the unforeseen consequences of the current worldwide pandemic during the last few months have been the restrictions on worldwide travel. This has caused much hardship in the travel and tourist industry. However, it has also seen a massive reduction in our use of fossil fuels, particularly petrol and aviation fuels. One of the better consequences of this has been a massive improvement of air quality throughout the world, especially in our cities. Governments throughout the world have always seemed to be hoping that so-called renewable energy is the solution to the problem of climate change. They wish to ignore the first law of thermodynamics, i.e. that in any given system, energy is constant. As a scientist, this is something I've lived with all my working life. What the people in governments didn't bargain for was, in this pandemic time, there's an enforced reduction in travel, which has greatly reduced the worldwide energy usage. Many Christians have been saying that we should take care of the environment, i.e. God's world. It does look as though for some time to come we will need to restrict our travel and possibly our holiday aspirations. Some 20 years ago, the Christian Charity Tier Fund suggested a scheme involving a number of small steps we as individuals could take to break the habits of a lifetime and leave a better mark on the world. They call this the carbon fast. Many people have preached that we should reduce our energy usage and not just change how we transform it. In other words, we need to reduce our carbon footprint, hence the carbon fast. If we look at the created world, what does it mean to each and every one of us? Let us look at the changing world today, and particularly how man has changed the world, sometimes for good, at other times for evil. Indeed, how in several parts of the world, man has got a huge carbon footprint, namely the global north, whilst in the global south, man has hardly any carbon footprint at all. When we remember the terrible situations people across the world are living in, not just during this time of pandemic, we must give thanks for our situation generally in this country and pray for those relief agencies, many of whom are Christian, that they may be able to redress the balance across the world. We should reflect how much the world has changed in just our lifetime, but particularly so in the last 150 years. Was it for the better? Well, in many ways it was. We have electricity in many parts of the world. We have clean water in many parts of the world. But that's not just good enough. There are so many parts of the world without these two vital essentials to modern life. The carbon fast is not just a fast that we think about during the 40 days of Lent. It can take place any time of the year. Indeed, it must. We need to take the opportunity of easing the lockdown restrictions to rethink many of our general ways of living, especially in the countries like ours, which are rich, although sometimes we don't think so. You might ask what we as individuals can do. Well, there are simple things. I've got 3 or 4, 5 to recommend to you. We can remove a light bulb from our house in our main sitting rooms and live without it for the next 40 days. Then we could change it for an energy saving bulb. How about switching off things when they're on standby? Do you know that your microwave cooker uses more power to run the clock for 24 hours than it does to cook an average meal every day? Do you fill the kettle when you want a cup of tea or a cup of coffee? In other words, fill it when you only want 1 or 2 cupfuls. What a waste of energy to boil that water and let it go cool. Do you use a plethora of plastic bags? Or do you use bags for life? When you go to the supermarket, do you take bags for life with you? Never mind the 5p reduction, it's the thought of doing it. Think about who works the hardest in the house. Is it Dad? Is it Mum? Well, no, it's not actually a human thing at all. It's something like your fridge or your freezer. It works 24/7. That's it, if you've got it switched on. By thinking along these simple lines, we may have an opportunity to rethink how we live our lives and to have an impact on people whose standard of living is far below ours, in some cases living in abject poverty. As Christians, we can do a great deal in 40 days and continue afterwards. During the period of a carbon fast, like any fast, the first step is always the hardest. It should give us time to reflect when this lockdown eases. It should give us time to make sacrifices, time to hear God, time to do things, to act ourselves, to make God's world a better place. I leave you with a quote from a former Bishop of Liverpool, John Jones, who stated, "Those of us who emit more than a fair share of carbon have a moral imperative to rein in our consumption. We need to live justly love mercy, and walk humbly with God. That means to walk close to the earth, to tread lightly on it, and not be disconnected from it. We are at the moment, in the last couple of weeks, suffering from almost another pandemic, and we've witnessed millions of people throughout the world standing united against racism and inequality. We've been talking just now about inequalities of living standards, but it's also the inequalities of behaviour to one another. What should we as individuals do? We just talked about small steps of saving energy. I'm indebted to the chief executive of a worldwide organisation which has branches in over 30 countries in the world. It's not a company, it's a partnership. It has a very ethical standard because every employee is an owner of the company. There are no shareholders. Everyone works for the company, in other words, for themselves. The chief executive recently spoke to company members online with three things which struck me at this time when BLM, Black Lives Matter, I would like to share with you. And he said, "We must stand together in solidarity with all those who fear racial injustice and discrimination. We need to reform society from top to bottom. We need to commit ourselves to providing a better world for everyone, regardless of race, colour, creed or socio-economic background." Those three things are worthwhile doing. I repeat again to you, let us respect God's creation, His physical world and His human world. Let us tread lightly upon the earth and live in peace with all mankind. Amen.